Hello, everyone. This is Dominic from Tonebase, and we're very excited to have Noam Sivan today to talk about improvisation. So, this is a topic that we're just so delighted to have presented on, and we're going to be listening to some of Noam's improvisations live today. He'll be kind of walking us through what's going on in his head as he performs them, and then we'll be able to take some questions on the back half, the second part of the live stream. So as he's playing, as he's talking, feel free to use this opportunity to type your questions. And of course, if you're on the Tonebase platform, use that blue ask button to ask your questions so that we can display them on the screen so everyone can see. So welcome to our YouTube audience and of course our Tonebase members. And I'm going to bring Noam onto the screen now. So welcome Noam. Where are you coming to us from, first of all?
Hello, Dominic. Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm now in Stuttgart, Germany.
Wonderful. So is that where you reside permanently, primarily?
Yes.
Very
Yes.
good. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself? So I assume you were brought up as a classical pianist, like most of us. And then at what point did you discover improvisation and then take it down the path that you did? Because you have one of the few degree programs for improvisation in the world, if not the only one, at least the first one I know. So can you tell us a little bit about your backstory before we get into the music?
Sure. I grew up in Israel and I did my studies in Israel and then in the United States. I I was always interested in improvisation and my education was as pianist and composer. And I noticed that there was some difference between the two, at least how it is taught, and I wanted to find a connecting link between them. So slowly and gradually it's evolved, and then I found that this is really wonderful area and so rich in possibilities, and I'm looking forward to presenting some of them today at the live stream.
Thank you so much. And before the stream, we were Leah was asking a question about improvisation and styles. That's something that's kind of unique about yourself, I think, is that you improvise in specific styles, structures, and forms. And can you talk to us a little bit about, and can you maybe demonstrate for us some of these different styles? So when you wake up or when you go to a performance, do you sit down and say to yourself, I'm going to improvise in an impressionistic style, or I'm going to improvise in a classical style, in a sonata form? Is that what you do before you start playing typically?
That's part of what I do. Some of what I do, some of the things I'm doing, improvising in specific styles, and I like to call them languages, because when you have a language, if you speak English or French or Chinese or any language, then you have the words and the sentences and the grammar that is specific to that language. And when you learn the grammar of that language, you can express yourself freely within that language. Now, we can go into a specific language or style that was used in the past, or we can create our own in the present. So I do both of those things, and I think as I'm playing and improvising today, we can also talk about those. I would like to present some things in specific languages that are familiar. Maybe towards the end, I will do something that's more free, but first to go into specific languages so that we can also talk about how we listen to improvisation, relationship between improvisation and perhaps composed structures. So shall we start?
Absolutely. Take it away.
I have here a couple of flashcards and I will pick a few notes. Let me just shuffle them and let's see what comes up. This is a G sharp. And then second note, is an F. And the third note this is A natural. G sharp, F, A natural. So I will now improvise. And as you listen, please feel free to think about what's happening with the initial material, how it develops through the different sections of the piece. Yeah, and then we'll talk. So let me just settings.
Wow, bravo. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, wow. Sounded fantastic. I mean, my gosh. My gosh, bravo. Bravo. How do you do that? My gosh.
Thank you. We'll talk about how I do this absolutely with pleasure. And we're not going to summarize all of it in 5 minutes, but But before we get to talk about how, let's talk about the process of what's happening in the improvisation. So I got the motive, and I said, okay, descending minor third, ascending major third. Okay, pa pa pa. What can I do with it? What kinds of motives can be created? And then how that can happen in different sections. Of course, the musical style was romantic style, as you could easily figure out. And then different things, different genres, an allegro and maybe nocturne, maybe a mazurka or something. Just different things that could be used. So you can see the relationship between composed genres and improvised genres, and the things that go with the motive in that particular style. But maybe it's time now to try some different styles, and I'd like to play something in Baroque style. And I have a bunch of flashcards for key signatures. I'm going to shuffle them, close my eyes, and played something very... Okay, I got E flat minor. I played something quite dramatic. Maybe I should now change the character to something slower. So here we go.
Wow, bravo yet again.
Thank you.
Bravo. I mean, so many. I mean, it sounds just like what we associate with the Baroque styles. My gosh. So, by the way, just I know you can't see it, but everyone So many bravos, so many claps in the chats. So on both
Thank
both
you.
platforms. So I know you can't hear it, but there's a lot of cheering going on. Wow.
Well, I will say something that we normally think about these musical styles as things that have existed in the past, and then they were written down, and now we have the written version of it. And for me, these are living languages, languages that can be used creatively, and and then we can enjoy the abundance that we have in terms of languages and possibilities to really explore lots of different kinds of things. So this was an arioso, of course, something that can also be a vocal piece taken from I don't know, an aria for voice with continuo accompaniment or with an oboe obbligato or something like this, or as a keyboard piece. And yeah, in Baroque style, let me try something in classical style. I'll pick another flashcard from here. Close my eyes. B major. Okay, so now I played in 3/4. The next one, let's do it in 6/8 to change the meter.
bravo again. People were saying they heard the voice of Mozart. They heard some Clementi. It really just gorgeous playing. I mean, everyone says they can't believe this is possible. I'm just so fascinated. We are so lucky today. I don't think anyone was expecting this to have all these snippets of time capsules almost, it feels like. So wow, and different languages. As you are teaching us, these are different languages, not just
different languages. And maybe we can briefly about the Mozart style. What I can say, it was not entirely in sonata form, but it had elements of that, starting in home key, going to the dominant for a second key area, and then in what was the development section got a little bit more dramatic. I used some triplets to move to some minor keys, and then returning to the home key, using some elements that I could remember from what I played in the beginning, not exactly the same melodies, but in reference to the style and genre. And continuing with the time travel, maybe we should now do something impressionistic, Debussy.
Please.
And I can again pick a few notes, or if some people want to suggest a few notes, we can use that.
Oh, sure, yeah. Why don't we, ask the audience if 4 notes?
4 notes, yeah, 4 notes.
4 notes, okay. Hey everyone, so if you would like to, if you'd like to type 4 notes, we can have Noam improvise something romantically.
The first one, the fastest.
Yeah, the fastest thing. But yeah, I mean, it's so amazing though that you're not just improvising just stuff. You're improvising things within a structure, everyone. So he's not just he's thinking about development, sonata form. He's thinking about all these different structures and returning to melodies he already composed previously. So it's this is really shocking levels of improvisation beyond just something through composed, just making stuff up on the moment. So let's see if there's any. Okay, I got 4 notes from Sindra on Tonebase. The 4 notes are D flat, F, G, B.
Perfect. Thank you.
Enjoy.
Thank you.
yet again, very, very impressive. I mean, of course, many of us heard some, Debussy like, impressionism there. People were saying it must be a prelude of some kind. Did you have a title for what you just improvised? I mean, it was so characterful. That there was all these characters. I just it's so enchanting what you're able to do.
Maybe have people suggest titles.
Oh yeah, suggest a title for what you guys just heard, and then I'll share them with Noam.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe before we get into questions, maybe one last improvisation.
Perfect.
Which will be more in a freestyle. So not a sort of specific historical style, but could go in a number of directions. And I'll just play it. I don't know, a toccata.
Sounds great. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I agree with everyone that is just in capital letters. Capital letters. How? How? How is this possible? I mean,
How
my
is this
gosh.
possible?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about it.
Let's get into this.
Let's get into this. A lot of hard work,
Of course.
and yeah, takes time and willingness to take risks also, I would say, and willingness to explore. But I would say first you need the passion for it. You need to really want to do this. And I recall myself that I felt it is not enough for me to just play the inherited repertoire. So I enjoy it and I do a lot of it. And I've done a lot of it. And of course, you can hear that a lot of it also informed my improvisations. But I love the repertoire and I play it, and it's definitely part of me, part of how I grew up. But I felt that this is part of a larger picture. So if we do go back to learn how these people learned music in the 18th century, in the 19th century, maybe because they did not have such a large repertoire as we have today, they had to be creative, and they had to create as well as to perform what's written. And I think this is a healthy mix, and this is what I'm trying to bring back in my own concerts and in my advocacy and in my teaching and in all of my activities, because I think we would be happier and healthier as a musical culture when we do that. So I think if I don't know, you don't have to agree with me, but from my experience working with people and working with people who learn to improvise after they said, oh, I would never be able to do this, or I don't have talent for it, all of that. But then they start working, they start making progress, and the things that they can do that they did not know that they could do. So I think they emerge as more, I don't want to use specific adjectives, but they are happy as musicians that they have those added skills, that they can do those things, and they feel freer and less limited in their options when they are with their instruments. So I think it is natural to want to be creative. Children want to be creative. And then when you think about it, when children start playing instruments, they want to improvise. And then you teach them, you say, oh no, don't improvise. There are so many things I want to tell you. And of course, from my perspective, the right thing to tell them, let's do both. Let's teach them all of this material, but also nurture the creativity. And again, I want to bring this language analogy. When we have spoken languages, if you want to learn Spanish, it is not enough just to learn what's written and then to recite these words, however artistic you're doing it. But it is not called speaking the language. Speaking the language means that you can phrase your own thoughts and you can do creative writing, you can write things, you can talk freely, you can tell us about your experiences, what you did yesterday, about your opinions on politics, on society, on philosophy, on different things. So we can be creative with the language, and the same thing should be in music, to be creative with the language or with the different musical languages that we are lucky to have inherited from composers. And then I think this leads to a fuller musical experience for the musicians and for also the listeners and the musical culture. So yes, I would like to see more improvisation, and more improvisation that is informed by what we have learned from what we inherited.
So then, so for example, I noticed that I was looking at you on YouTube and stuff. And I noticed that you've basically played almost all the repertoire. You play Goldberg variations, you play all these pieces. So do you think it's important to start by just simply amassing a lot of repertoire, learning a lot of repertoire, so that you can is that a prerequisite, I guess, for this type of improvisation? But or can you amass this knowledge in other ways beyond just the fingers? Can you talk about that? Because I'm sure a lot of us we know a lot of music by Bach. We play some of it maybe, but do you feel like you have to get your fingers in everything, or do you learn a few things and then listen a lot, analysis, or what's the balance of that?
Very good question. So it's not that you have to first learn and analyze and then you improvise. You should start improvising the moment you start playing an instrument, and then develop it together. Now, when we are at a situation, we're not in a situation where that is the music education that we receive. So the music education that we receive as classical musicians, we learn repertoire, and then people are in their 20s and 30s and say, hey, now I recognize I want to improvise. How do I do that? So then you learn to improvise, and you need to have patience, because you are used to being very quick with certain things, and then with improvisation it's going to be slower. But then you will realize that you can use everything that you learned. It will help your ears and your knowledge and all of those things. It starts to click, and it doesn't always happen immediately, but we need to open our ears and to open our mind and to learn how to create a healthy channel of communication between the ear and the analytic mind and the creative mind and the fingers. So all of those things should work together. We're not used to thinking about it this way. We think normally, oh, I'm not a composer, so that goes out of the window, and then I just play what's written, and then I work with sound, interpretation, technique, and then that's my world. And if we open this to bring in improvisation, we say you can start by improvising 4 measures, just a melody. You can start by learning a few chords and then improvise a chord progression. So you don't start by improvising this, of course. You start with baby steps, with things that you learn step by step, and then you look at the repertoire and say, oh, there is this melody, or there is this chord progression, or this texture. You start noticing things. And we can also see how people learned. So you know that in jazz, they learned a lot by listening and copying. And of course, there are some chord progressions, but they don't have 400 years of repertoire. So they used a lot more the ears. But then when you look at how Bach or Mozart and Beethoven learned improvisation, they did that also. Because Mozart did not learn music theory the way we learn it today. He learned a slightly different version of music theory. We can talk about it some other time, but he used a lot of experiential learning of listening and improvising, or reading, sight reading and improvising. If you read Mozart's letters, always he said, I was sight reading and then improvising. So those two things were connected. So we have to use the ears, the mind, and the creativity and the fingers.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for this eloquent explanation. Jenny has a question that I'd love to pose to you right now about this.
Yeah.
Jenny says, thank you so much for your wonderful music. How mentally challenging is such incredible improvisation compared to having a score of equal complexity? I mean, did you feel more comfortable with this style of like just literally creating an arioso in E flat minor, or playing, Bach Well Temper Clavier prelude in E flat minor? What's the mental? I mean, this seems like it'd be much more mentally taxing, but can you talk a little bit upon that?
how comfortable you are also connects to how often you've been doing something. So the more you do it, the more comfortable you become, and also the more knowledgeable you are about the process. When I started teaching improvisation, from the first moment I said, there is a student concert at the end. Everybody has to be on stage, everybody has to improvise. And not only that, there are student performances in class when you play for other people. So you learn to improvise in front of other people. Of course, at first in a lab atmosphere, in a supportive atmosphere. But that process, it is part of the process. With regard to comparing today, let's say if you take a Bach prelude from the Well-tempered clavier and then you play it. So if you just take the music and you sight read and you play the notes, or you learn it and you play all the notes, then you can play it. But then if you play it in concert, the expectations are that you are really going to work on it for 2 months at least and shape every phrase. And then, so the level of comfort also relates to the level of expectation, because then if you also use a piece that has been recorded many times, the recordings create additional expectations, and those expectations did not exist when they played this music in the 18th century. So we can get into it, but this is not so important. The important thing is that yes, you need to be fully concentrated. You need to be, if you lose concentration in the middle, the music drops, absolutely. So you need to also be fully present when you improvise, and you build it step by step with small chunks. There was a question you asked me before, maybe we should refer to it, because you asked whether the improvisations should be in specific styles or in freestyle. Mm-hmm. Do you want to rephrase the question, or should I just answer it?
Yeah. So I mean, in other words, for your students, you tell them like, okay, like today your assignment is to specifically. Actually, let me just read it briefly again. Let me just read it. Okay. So Leah is asking, do you think it's important to identify and mostly stay within a particular musical time period as one learns to improvise? Is that important, would you say?
Okay. We can talk about, broadly speaking, about tonal languages and modal and non-tonal and extended tonal. So there are some categories. For example, if I talk about Baroque, Classical, Romantic, they're all tonal languages, and there are some basics that are common to all of them. And in the same way, lots of different kinds of popular music are tonal, and there are some common characteristics. So there are some basics. So if you're dealing with tonal music, let's say some basics of harmony. And then I would say, yes, it is good to try to understand which elements belong to a particular language and which elements do not belong. Because if you start playing and the music moves through too many different styles, then we're not quite sure where the core is. So a language also means clarity, comprehensibility. And for the music to be comprehensible and clear, then if the language is coherent, and again, if the language has different ways of using a question mark and an exclamation point and quotations, and a sentence structure with lots of different adjectives. So there are certain things that are part of the language. Now, we also know that there is something that's called abstract art and abstract music, where it can be freer, and it does not have to be in a particular grammar. If I start, I don't know, if I start playing something like this. So I can also do that. And here, of course, there is much more freedom in intervals that I choose. And so this is non-tonal. And So you can also do that. But also this is a language, because I'm not going to play a C major triad in the middle of it. So all of a sudden it feel unrelated. So there are certain elements that are linguistic, but a very important thing here. So yes, it is good to learn languages, but you do not need to learn all the languages. So yes, I'm multilingual, and this is something that interests me, but not everyone is interested in it. And some people say, no, I just want to do improvisation in my own style and to develop my own style, and then which harmonies do I use, which melodies do I use, and then the process is a lot of things, to be aware and self-conscious of how do I shape my own style, and this is what composers do. I'm also a composer, so I know this, that as a composer you want to create something that's your own, and again, what does it mean, your own, right? It's such an elusive term, but what it means that you explore, you get to the bottom of it, and then you understand that there are no unintended sonorities that are just there by accident, that it's very intentional. So when you learn to improvise and you want to improvise in your own style, you have to look at the intervals you're using, at the chords you're using, the melodies you're using, and to make sure that they are coherent within themselves and there are no foreign elements that make it sound like something else.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, my gosh, we're learning so much today. It's a real treat. Speaking of composing, I mean, I can't help but ask this. I mean, when you just improvised for us today, I think all of us would be like, I would love it if I literally just composed that myself. You know, I would write that down in a heartbeat. I mean, how do you differentiate between improvisation and composition? Because what you're doing is you're basically writing pieces for us. And one interesting thing that I discovered, I was talking to a jazz pianist, Dan Tepfer, one time. I was asking him about the recording process. How do you record an improvisation? Because at a certain point, 5 times down the line, it's becoming a composition because you're doing the same thing and kind of tweaking it. So how do you differentiate, I'm going to write a composition or I'm going to improvise something? And do you ever improvise something and say, actually, that is a great composition and I'm going to write that down? Your improvisations is so good that it just seems like you have compositions coming out of you just like a waterfall. But how do you determine what's worthy of a composition and what's not?
It is more project specific. So if you want to write down a piece for a particular purpose or you want to compose it, then you sit down and you're doing it. And if you want to improvise and you prepare a concert, then you prepare your improvisations and you go to the concert. So there is a lot of overlap between the two. And I do find myself writing down compositional ideas that can be used in an improvisation, or writing them and improvising on these ideas. But I do not develop them in writing too long, because the purpose is for them to go to improvisation. And then when I sit down and compose, then it is a different process for me, because then when I have to really slowly find and write every note, then this note or that note, so the process is different, because you write it down and you want it to be preserved as a document. Of course, this gets recorded and that's also a document, right? And you can absolutely now sit down and write down what I just played, and people could do that. Just maintain my copyright, yes. Yes, you can write down an improvisation, absolutely. Musical creativity is rich and can go in so many different directions. And again, I do take inspiration from what I learned about past composers, that they did both. So you hear those stories of Beethoven. He had this big concert, and then he was improvising in the concert, and then he wrote it down, and now we have the Fantasy Opus 77 by Beethoven. And Bach was invited by the king, Frederick. He gave him a theme, and then he improvised a 3-part Richter from the musical offering. And then he went home, and then he wrote down presumably what he improvised. And now we have the richer current three voices, which sounds like an improvisation if you play through that piece. The opening number from the musical offering, it doesn't look like the Welcome to Clavier at all. It looks like a Bach improvising. So you can see that this is a different kind of creativity for him. So if I would now write down an arioso in E flat minor in Baroque style, it would have some similarities to what I did, but it would also have some differences of things that when you sit down and write them down, you can have more structural elements. And when you improvise, you have more spontaneity and flow. So the flow is the strong part of the improvisation and the structure is a strong part of the composition, but both inform one another.
Beautiful. We had a question, speaking of the past, we had some people asking about past great improvisers. So JG was asking about, Zifra was a great virtuoso pianist improviser. He says also Hamlin, doesn't do a lot of improvisation, but JG heard him do that 5-minute improvisation for The People United by Rzewski. And speaking of Frederick Rzewski, I'm sure you know about him playing a passionata, improvising in the passionata or Hammerklavier or these sonatas. Do you have thoughts or do you have favorite past improvisers, like living ones that we can listen to, or what are your thoughts on Zifra in particular, or the things that Rzewski's done with improvising? Do you ever do that where you're playing obviously for Beethoven concertos, I assume you might improvise your own, but do you ever think maybe I will play Beethoven's? How do you navigate that, and what do you think about some of the past improvisers like?
This just shows that the urge to improvise is there. And Georgi Zifra and Rzewski from an older generation, and so they were improvising, Zifra as a pianist and Rzewski coming as a composer to playing Beethoven sonatas. So I think we need to have more of that, more people who do that, and what I enjoy doing, as you have seen, is not only to do those free improvisations, but also improvisations that have a dialogue with musical structure, which is something that some improvisers resist. And they say, no, improvisation is just completely free and unrelated to structure. And I like both. I like the richness of possibilities. So whether I improvise a cadenza, I've done that, of course. And also I've composed cadenzas. When you improvise a cadenza, you have to bear in mind that you are adding an improvised element to a composed piece. So while I think it's great if you do it and if you can do it well, this is not everything that improvisation has to offer. So when people say, oh, improvisation, let's put it in a cadenza, I say this diminishes what improvisation can offer. You can improvise an entire 20-minute concerto or an entire 20-minute sonata, or you can improvise all of those things, and it doesn't have to just be that spot. So traditionally we say, oh, improvisation in the cadenza. Okay, you're allowed to do it in the cadenza. And I say, yes, great, let's do it, but let's also open up more possibilities. So not just to limit it to this specific spot, which has been preserved marginally over the generations, but many more options of improvisation.
Thank you. We have a question from Andrea. Andrea says, thanks so much for this amazing presentation. My question is, when you are in the midst of an improvisation, how far ahead are you planning? Is part of your brain always on the next phrase, next structure? Yeah, how do you jump through all those mental gymnastics of planning this? What is happening in your brain? Are you in the future all the time?
Okay, you have to be a little bit ahead of the music to some extent, but you cannot be too far ahead because there is so much going on in the present. There are different musical elements. There is melody, harmony, texture, and some aspects of form that we mentioned. And you cannot really concentrate on more than one at any single moment. So when you practice, it's good to separate the elements, to practice just the melody or just a chord reduction. Or if you already have the chords written, and then to practice different textures to them, so that you learn the different elements separately, with harmony being the most important, especially in tonal music, because this is the vocabulary. You need to learn the words, the dictionary, you need to learn that. Now, when you learn all of those things and then you start putting them together, of course, you can practice fast music slowly, which you have to do. Even with metronome, you can practice improvisation with metronome. I do that also. And then during the improvisation, you learn your skills so that you can make some elements easier for you while you focus on the others. So, for example, if I want to focus on more complex harmonies, then I neutralize the melody and then I just play simpler patterns. And if I want to focus on the beauty of the melody, then I relax the harmony a little bit, or I use a slower harmonic rhythm so that the melody is more flowing as a result. So yes, there is a separation of elements, but you need to be a little bit ahead. And I tell that to my students also, to not be surprised by what's coming out of the instrument, but to be always a little bit ahead to think what's coming next.
Great. And I'm going to combine two questions, actually. CJO was asking, is there a book that covers this material? And I'm going to tie that into a question or a comment that was put by HP. HP is saying it's important to learn different patterns so we can put them together while improvising, kind of like building a house with Legos. Are there any books that actually have patterns in classical music? I know in jazz there's pattern books you can study. I'm not familiar. Is there any books that exist that have a compilation of patterns in classical music, or is that something that hasn't existed yet and maybe someone has yet to write?
This is a problem. If you talk about classical and romantic languages, which are the heart of piano music, there is not much that we can look at, and we have to compile materials from different ends. So in terms of historical sources, there is the CPE Bach essay on keyboard instruments, the last chapter of which is devoted to improvisation, and it gives us some figured bass. In Baroque, you have some materials. That's true. But when you talk about classical and romantic, not much. There is the Czerny book, which is a very good document, Czerny Opus 200, systematic introduction to improvisation and pianoforte. It shows the tradition, but it doesn't teach you step by step. So he already assumes that you know harmony, you know counterpoint, you know figured bass. But what I would say, you need to learn harmony, you need to learn counterpoint, you need to learn figured bass for classical and romantic. And then what I also recommend is to do chord reductions from repertoire. So if you play a Beethoven sonata and you just play just the chords, the chord reduction by section, the opening theme, transition, the second theme, you learn, oh, I know this sequence, oh, I know this cadence, oh, I know this progression, and you start compiling them and writing them in your music notebook, and then that is going to be your dictionary of chords and chord progressions that you can use in that style. And you can do that for Debussy, for Bartok, for Schoenberg, for not only for anything that you want, and for contemporary music and for jazz, or if you're a composer and in your own style, you can do that in your own language as well. So yes, to have the chords, and then you need a separate collection of melodic ideas and a separate collection of textures and rhythmic. So you need to break the musical elements. You can learn from the repertoire, and it is a fascinating learning process. And in terms of books, more needs to be done in this area. Yeah.
I see. I saw one person, Ruben, mention, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Gejerdingen's book about music in the galant style. I don't know this book, but it shows lots of schemas and stuff. So
Yes.
Ruben mentions this.
Gerdingen, even more than the book, I would recommend his website, which in the past was called Monuments of Partimenti, and now it has a different name. And it has a lot of collections of instructional materials from the 18th century, specifically Italian. So Italian partimento tradition, people like Fenaroli and Durante and others. And then he moved on to look at the Paris Conservatoire from the 19th century, and then he added harmony treatises from the 19th century from Paris. So yes, those are things that you should you can use and you can look at. And it is not. Yes, he also wrote a book, and of course you can read the book and learn from it as well. Then you need to do the extra work of connecting the dots. Like I said, the harmony and the melody and the textures and all, if you want to improvise a 7-minute fantasy. So a book cannot teach you how to do that ready-made. You have to do the extra work yourself. And also a teacher, it's great to have a teacher, but also a teacher cannot give you all the answers. People need to learn how to learn, and to learn how to learn intelligently and to make the right conclusions from the given material, from a book, from a treatise, from a website, from a teacher, and then how do I do the work? So the crucial element here is to spend daily time and to really penetrate the topic, to ask intelligent questions and to not give up, to keep searching for answers.
Wow, thank you. We have a time for like maybe one or two more questions. And Hazel, I agree. I would also like to listen again to Noam's improvisation. So Hazel and me both, we're going to go to the archive and watch that again. But let me take a look here. There was a question about, I'm going to maybe tie two things in. So first of all, simply Pan was asking, is it harder to improvise slow music? Or is fast music harder? Which is kind of interesting. And then Eamon was asking, do you have any classical pieces of music that are sort of at the intermediate level that you might have enjoyed using to improvise upon or something like that? I mean, it seems like Debussy might be a composer that it's easy to kind of extrapolate upon, but at least just to me. But do you have any thoughts on intermediate level improvising pieces? And also, is slow easier or is hard or fast?
Okay.
Music harder?
Slow and fast, they have different difficulties, which are similar to slow and fast in composed music, and also are, by the way, instrument specific. So if you play slow music on a string instrument and slow music on a piano, there are different difficulties. And with regard to improvisation, so when you play slow music, you have to keep the tension from note to note, and the choice of each note in the melody becomes more meaningful. In a fast music, there is the challenge of just the amount of information. So you have to practice it slowly. And in terms of just playing the notes and having control and feeling comfortable, so yes, fast music is challenging. And like I said, you need to separate the elements to practice slowly, all of those kinds of things. So I would say at first, yes, start by improvising slow music. But if you can build your skills to fast music and aim at a faster tempo, you say, now I'm at quarter equals 50 and I want to get to quarter equals 120, and I'm using the same rhythmic units, the 16th notes, and I'm not adding 30 seconds when I'm quarter equals 50. I'm still using the 16th notes, and then I build my skill when I get to quarter equals 120. So the metronome can help you with that as well. And with regard to the other question, I would say if you want to improvise, before you improvise on pieces, you have to learn chords and chord progressions, and to improvise on chord progression. You can improvise on the circle of fifth, So when you have the progression of like a Paganini variation, yeah, things like that. So you can improvise on a circle of fifths and on the chords, and then that is an easier starting point than improvising on a melody. Because when you improvise on a melody, you have to create the harmonies, and how to create the harmonies, you need to learn the grammar first. So I would say first you need to do a lot of work learning chord progressions, learning harmony, improvising on written harmonies. Don't start by improvising the harmonies. Start by getting written harmonies. Figured bass, I mentioned CPE Bach. Handel, also a wonderful manual, continue according to Handel. Everybody should practice from that and learn the chords and learn figured bass. Then you improvise on a given bass. And then if you want to take melodies from pieces, take from anything. You take a melody, you can take two measures from anything and then improvise on that as a starting point. So it doesn't have to be improvising on a complete piece. It can be improvising on two measures. So with regard to choice of repertoire, just use the music that you like the most.
Beautiful, beautiful. And then one other question is about jazz. So in jazz, Anonymous says, in jazz you're taught to transcribe phrases, solos to learn the language. Do you transcribe other people's improvisations? Or I think what I'm hearing is that you did study music, like, of Bach and Beethoven. You studied their cadenzas to understand how because there's plenty of evidence written down of how Beethoven improvised in his sonatas, concertis. Is that basically what you study? Not other famous improvisers like Gifra or
I did listen to improvisers, and actually some years ago I wrote my doctoral dissertation on improvisation, and I did the research, and I did a fair amount of listening just to get to know what's out there. So I did not transcribe anything, but I definitely listened and started thinking about what other people do. I wanted to learn different approaches. So yes, you should do that, and you should learn from what's out there, listen to different improvisers, absolutely, and learn in the same way that you learn from listening to any music. So there is learning by listening, and there is learning by writing, and learning by analyzing. There are different kinds of learning. The learning that is the most detailed is the learning that involves actually writing things, and then improvisation in relation to the written materials, and that there is no replacement for that. But there are all of these sources, and I would say divide your time between different types of learning so that it's more enjoyable and interesting and diverse, so that you're not only doing one thing. So yes, the sort of the detailed work, you can get tired after a while, and then you need something more refreshing, and then you listen to something, and then you read a piece of music and then you play something. So it's a mixture of different things that helps you stay focused, and then you have a lifelong path of learning.
Beautiful. And one of the last questions is, what do you find yourself telling your students the most? Is there something like a sentence or something that you find yourself telling your students, of improvisation the most? I'm just really curious about, what are the things that you're trying to instill into them as they're working?
I think I've already said a lot of that.
Okay, got it.
In terms of, no, it's not that I don't want to answer. I just feel that I've already said a lot of things that I already tell my students.
Okay,
and
very
there's
good.
One thing that's definitely needed the most, because different students have different personalities. So some people, for example, they can improvise and have fluency, but they don't like to write. And then I tell them, what you're doing is good and it's nice, but if you want to get to a higher level, that's what you need to be doing. You need to do more of the writing. And some people are very good in analyzing and being analytic, and then they have some other kinds of problems with, I don't know, that it's hard for them to find new ideas, or they keep repeating themselves, and they need to get more inspiration. and then you inspire them. You play something, then they repeat, and then you give them exercises to keep creating new stuff. So those things depend on who we are working with. And one of the beautiful things in teaching improvisation and teaching creativity is that you work with other people's creativity, and then you help them grow as musicians, and also in terms of their personalities. And everyone is different in that regard.
That makes perfect sense. Well, I think we're going to wrap things up now. I think probably the most amazing thing about your improvisations, though, Noam, is something that I didn't see anyone talk about, but is so natural, is that you know when to end something. And that's something that I've talked to a lot of other people, jazz musicians and more, and knowing when to make something just kind of wrap up in just such a natural way is a true skill. And for me, that was the most amazing thing. Everything felt just right. So similarly, we're going to try and get this stream, just right and not keep you too long. So we just want to thank you so much today for for being here. This has been just an absolute treat for all of us. You have so many new fans, of course. Everyone loves you, and if any of you are on Tonebase, Noam has productions that he's done for us. We definitely look forward to working with him in the future. And Noam, do you have any last thoughts before we sign off?
I encourage people to improvise, to not be afraid, and to enjoy the little steps in the process. Not to be intimidated by big goals, but to just enjoy the process.
Well, thank you so much, and I hope everyone enjoyed today. We'll see you guys next week for some exciting live streams, and thank you again, of course, to Noam for joining today. Bye-bye, everyone.